In my little list of difficult topics, I don't know whether you'll think that this one is difficult or not difficult. Contentment. Contentment. Now, it's probably a nice word, but is it difficult or is it easy to find contentment?
Both. Yeah, depends. Yes. The circumstances.
It does depend on the circumstances, doesn't it? That's the whole point. So we're going to be looking at Philippians chapter 4, which is where Paul's got something to say about it. Not that there aren't things in other parts of the Bible. There are, but we're going to look at bits in Philippians chapter 4. We'll end up doing the whole chapter, but most of the chapter. But we're going to be flipping around a little bit. So can I have... Oh. Next one. Yeah. So the whole point of this talk today is about learning to be content. Now, I'm glad there is such a thing as learning, because I'm 74, but I still feel like I'm at the beginning end of learning to be content in all circumstances. If you didn't have circumstances, yeah, it'd be easy to be content, wouldn't it?
Yes.
Yes.
But we do have circumstances, and that's what raises the difficulties. So next one. So I just put here a list of times that I can think of when I find being content difficult. And you can add your own, and I'm going to ask you that. Well, one is when I have too much to do and not enough time or strength to do it. Right? That was yesterday. Wasn't it, Stuart? It's probably the day before and the day before that as well, and it probably will be tomorrow. But right now, I'm all right. But, you know, I go home and see all this chaos and all the stuff, and you know what's going to happen. But that's one that can really, help us to feel stressed. And this one, the second one, what about when you have a relationship difficulty with someone? Does that impact your sense of contentment? So we've got a yes at the back. Oh, that's a big one for me. Yes. You know, that can put a lot of emotional stress on us. And it's not always easy when you're really, really, really feeling stressed and pressed and squeezed and angered and... Of course you don't. You're all sitting there looking lovely. It wouldn't happen.
Serene, we're content.
Yeah, you're all content and serene. You're all much better than I am. I think you should all be up here and I should be down there. The third one is when I don't have enough money to do as I want, or to live as I want, or to have the things that I think I need or want. Can that also put a pressure on and impact your sense of contentment? I've got another one here. When my expectations are not met. Can be by other people, can be by something else in the situation. Does that affect anyone here? And the last one that I've got up here is when I don't feel valued. When people just either neglect me, dismiss me, don't listen to anything I'm saying because I'm a nobody.
That's it.
Feel like you're a nobody. Oh, Raylene, I fully understand that feeling, and I fully understand for the frustrations and the hurt and all kinds of other emotions that brings up. But all of those things affect our sense of contentment. Has anyone else got another one that they want to add to the list? There are lots more.
I've always quoted this statement when I complained about the outside toilet.
When you complain about the outside toilet.
I've told
No.
told that in all circumstances I should be content.
I think that's a good point, Sue.
Yes.
When I was young, the outside toilet was full of redback spiders in Sydney. And it was pretty scary when I was told that redbacks can kill you. Yeah, but I mean, serious things. So, yes, Beth?
Injustice.
Injustice. You can see my hackles raising. And it doesn't have to be against me. It can be against somebody who's dear to me. But Rob? Pain. Oh, yes. When we're in pain, then a sense of contentment can be very difficult to come by. And yet we're told to be content in all circumstances, and you think, oh, well, I failed that test, haven't I? But I like, go to the next one, please. I want to come back to this, because my favourite word here is learning to be content. Can we not be on a learning curve? Can't we?
Yep.
Because all of those ones that I put up there and the ones that people said here have caused me to be discontent. And it really wouldn't take much to make me feel discontent with any of those things again. So that's just my sinful nature, and I'm nowhere near perfect yet, so I don't know how old I've got to get to be. That's probably why I'm still alive. Get a bit more practice, because I need more practice. Now, in this chapter, Paul just picked on two of these things to mention. He didn't say anything about how they related to being content or discontent, but they're all just kind of put there together. So we're going to just look at two. So the first one is a relationship difficulty. So you see those people trying to row the boat and they don't want to go in the same direction. And what does that mean? You can see them out of the side of their mouth feeling jolly angry with each other. They're not very contented. And it's not going to work. They might end up going around in circles, but I don't think they're going to go anywhere else very fast. So let's just read chapter 4, verses 2 and 3. I plead with Euodia and I plead with Syntyche to agree with each other in the Lord. So we've got this kind of situation. Yes, and I ask you, your yoke fellow, whoever that is, that's a person, help these women who have contended at my side in the cause of the gospel, along with Clement and the rest of my fellow workers whose names are in the book of life. So this is in the church. So if we have this idea that, you're not going to come across any difficult people inside the church, and you go to another one down the road, you'll find pretty soon that the problem occurs again because the church is full of imperfect people, that is, sinners. And so, therefore, there is always, as soon as you've got two people, okay, Stuart and I have been married for nearly 52 years now, but of course there are times when he wants to go this way and I want to go that way. Aren't there? Okay. Now, I don't think that is absolutely unique.
No. Of course it is.
I think I've told you the story probably when we were having a kind of a verbal fight, None of you would have this, but, we were having this. And we had to go to church and I had to preach and probably Stuart was doing something else. And I said to Stuart, what can I do? I cannot preach while we are still in the middle of this argument. And he wisely said, let's put the argument aside and we'll finish it after we come home from church. And you are not preaching yourself, you're preaching God and His Word. So that was actually really good. So actually it's interesting that you can do that. And we could do that because we were committed to finishing the argument and resolving it. That's the big thing. Are you happy to just keep fighting, or are you committed to resolving it and restoring the relationship and getting it? So we got home 1 o'clock, so 1:30 we resumed the argument. It lasted 20 minutes, and well, the heat had gone out of it. And by now we could just talk rationally, quietly, calmly, express our different points of view, and it was very, very easy to resolve. We came to a very quick and, we were in a position of contentment. So anyway, so that's one thing. But I have to say, there are times when one of those people is someone you can't resolve an argument with. I just have to put that in. Most times it's in the category that I've just said. But sometimes one of the two people is so bent on their own path and so bent on putting you down, etc., that you have to walk away. Do you know what I mean? So, you don't do that readily, you don't do that easily, I don't do that easily. But sometimes it happens. Next one. So the other situation is when we don't have enough. You can see these two bears with their presents, and you think Christmas. And I know at Christmas some of my kids are going to get a present this size, and one of them, oh, don't tell him this, but one of them is getting as a present all of his schoolwork that he has still not collected from our house. So he'll be getting the biggest present of the lot because we're giving a little present to everybody of treasure from our house. And if they've still got their schoolwork there, then they're going to get a very big present and somebody else will get something else. Anyway, so here we have that, and this is a situation that Paul himself was in. And I'll just read bits of it now from verse 10. I rejoice greatly in the Lord that at last you've renewed your concern for me. Indeed, you have been concerned and you had no opportunity to show it. I'm not saying this because I am in need. In fact, he was in need. He was in prison, for goodness sake. For I have learnt to be content, whatever the circumstances. I'm glad he wrote learnt to be content. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learnt the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do everything through him who gives me strength. I don't know about you, but I don't like being hungry. Does that make you feel discontent? This is not just a matter of, having 2 scoops of ice cream or 3. This is a matter of actually being hungry. Next one. Being in Ethiopia taught us a lot of things. And this is a school. This is a very typical school for a large part of the world. So there they are. Kids are sitting there on benches. That's as close as they get to, they don't get desks or anything, and you've got a teacher up there doing that. Now, that in Ethiopia, you've got different kinds of schools, and some of them have got desks and everything. But, again, the next one. And one of the things that we noticed time and time and time and time again was that the poorest children are the happiest children. The poorest adults are the happiest adults. And you think, why? They're starving. It's very difficult for them to get basic food. it's very difficult for them to have enough money to have a pencil for the kid to be able to go to school. And why are they so happy? And if the kids are going to school, I mean, we've walked past loads of school children and, they're so proud of going to school. Their uniforms are in tatters. And, of course, our kids wouldn't be seen dead walking to school like that. But they're the happiest ones. They laugh as they go to school. They laugh as they go home. And the teachers beat them with a stick as they walk in the door. And the parents say, don't change that. We don't want our kids becoming like Western kids. I can understand that. And they put up with that. They're fine. They don't mind because it teaches them. They want to learn everything they can learn. I remember when we were in Canada and we were very, very, very poor. And it was because they hadn't given Stuart the right visa, so he couldn't work in the way that he wanted. We couldn't work. Anyway, towards the end of the year that we were there, there was a family, well, it wasn't a family, it was a couple who were as poor as we were, or poorer, which means that we didn't have anything. And then suddenly they were kicked out of their accommodation. Now, people we knew. She was a student at Regent College at the time, I think I was, and he was a black couple. So they had the prejudice against them for their colour. And here he was trying to do any sort of job, like Stuart was trying to do any sort of casual job. They both went to the same, agency. And they were kicked out of their accommodation. Where are they going to go? Now, we had 5 kids with us, 4 of our own and an extra one at that time. And and she said, well, we don't know who else to ask. Is it possible to come and stay with you? And I thought of all of those great big fancy houses that had spare bedrooms galore. Not one of them offered and not one of them would have said yes. Because their standards were such that they had to have all the gilded crockery and they had to have all of the everything else. What do you do when you've got no room? So I put it to our kids. And our daughter had unexpectedly to us, decided to come back to Australia that day. And she has left a note on the table. Hi, Mum and Dad, bye. I'm catching a plane back to Sydney today. I thought, we didn't know what was happening. But then we thought, right, there's one spare single bed. And our boys had quickly separated because they were all bunched up. So, if you can take another bedroom and, well, what they'll do, they sorted themselves out and they filled the whole house that way. And so we told them about this, what do we do? They said, take them, we will rearrange ourselves, we will go back to how we were. And while we were out, they rearranged the furniture. And there was one spare double bed in the house. They moved that and they made a bedroom for them. And they just slept in odd places. And, I was so grateful. And God said, do not charge them a cent for rent. Do not. Now, we didn't have enough money to feed us. And then God said that. What's the end of the story going to be? Can you guess?
Blessings.
Blessings. It was the happiest time that we had that whole year, wasn't it? It was amazing. It was ridiculous. here they're prancing around as if they're still in the Caribbean and turning the heating up and, but we had crazy stuff happen. And, of course, we have music going day and night and, in between our kids and us and them. The house was absolutely full of music and fun. And did we have enough food to eat? Can you guess? Yes, we did. Now, don't ask me how that happened, but I know it did. And everybody took turns cooking, even those who had never cooked in their lives before. So I put two of those on together. But we had fun with that too. Everything became blessing. And anyway, there's more to that story, but that's enough. Okay, so when we don't have enough and we don't know where the money's going to come from and we don't know where the food's going to come from. Another time we had somebody arrive with a big load of food, but that was at a different time when that same couple was staying with us 2 years later. Anyway, when they came back from the Caribbean and we came back from Australia without any plan to do so. God is much bigger than what we think can happen. Our capacity is this much, or sometimes this much. And God's is huge. And He can and He will provide, especially when we are obedient to what He says to do. And that was a fantastic time. Okay, next one. How do we learn to be content? Paul tells us three things. In verse 4 and 5, rejoice in the Lord always. Oh, how can that be? But that's what Paul says, and as if we haven't got it, he says it again. I will say it again. Rejoice. Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. The day that Stuart had his heart attack, we just had a wonderful evening, was in England, pancake supper. All the men in the group had cooked. There's an abundance of pancakes. Shrove Tuesday must have been. That's what they called it. All these pancakes. I happened to be the person who was taking turns to lead the Bible study, and there were a number of us who did. And we were doing this passage. And I have to say, I've often been annoyed by Paul saying this. Rejoice always. Paul, don't you know that sometimes it's very hard to rejoice? Maybe you're all kind of more calm and everything than I am. Sometimes I wish, some people seem to have a fixed smile on their face. You know those people? And they can just, the joy just comes out all the time, no matter what's going on. I wish I had that sort of temperament. I don't, unfortunately. So I've got to do the learning. But Paul says, do this, rejoice. So when we were in the hospital, wondering what was going on with Stuart, he'd gone to the ambulance to the hospital, and we did suspect heart attack, but I don't think we even said it to each other. But I knew we had to get an ambulance. You knew that, I think, too. And I can remember waiting in the waiting room, and these words, rejoice, rejoice, rejoice. Again, I say rejoice. It did help to calm me. And then when some medical person came out and said, well, we don't know if he's going to make it for another 48 hours, but you can go home now. Now, going home now, I had no torch with me. This is about 4 a.m. in the dark, and there weren't enough street lights, let alone going across country the way I had to go to get home. That was a very interesting walk, and the whole way, rejoice, rejoice, rejoice. And I managed not to fall over. And I didn't tell Stuart those words that we won't know if you're going to make it for another 48 hours, because he was, when I went to see him the next day, he was saying, "Oh, I do apologise for the college. I'm going to miss one day." He didn't know it was going to be a little bit more than that. But it actually did help. It really did help. I was not good at it, but I was learning to rejoice. And be gentle, it's interesting, because when we are discontented and feeling restless, one of the things that can come up is frustration, which is a form of anger. Now that might be a very low-level anger, but at a certain point, if it keeps on going and keeps on going and keeps on going, it can end up with a much more obvious form of anger, which could be words or it can be an action. So that's why Paul says, rejoice and be gentle. I think that's very wise in human nature. Next one. And then the next one says, verse 6, do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. I remember in Ethiopia, there was a pretty severe relationship difficulty. The root of it, I think, was that somebody didn't like the idea of a woman teaching biblical courses. I think that's what it was. But at the time, I couldn't figure out what was going on, and it was really, really, really severe. It became a lot worse. All I could think to do in the middle of the night when I couldn't sleep, I was walking around the kitchen, and all I could do was call out to God. And I just kept calling out to God and calling out to God. And it wasn't long after that God gave me certain pictures which really comforted me. The circumstances didn't change, but the change was on the inside. And in relation to God, I was at peace. I was content. I didn't like the circumstances, but I could still teach, even though there were a lot of attempts to stop me teaching. And I think that Paul's advice there, because I can get anxious really, really easily. Don't be anxious, says Paul, but pray. You know, sometimes we can increase our anxiety by saying the same things over and over and over again in a very frenzied way. And then if I find myself becoming frenzied, I actually stop praying. Why? How can I do that? Because at that point I say, God, this is what I say to him, God, I'm saying this once now, because I can't cope with going over and over and over again. Some people can, but if it makes it worse, I'm saying this once, God, you better be listening, because this is it. I'm handing this over to you, because I can't do anything more. In Jesus' name, amen. And it works. It works. Because if I find I'm just getting more and more frazzled, then that's not the kind of prayer that Paul is asking us to pray. But rather a prayer that takes God seriously at his word and says, God, you can deal with this. I can't. I am giving it to you, and I'm not strong enough to take it back. It's yours. What's Paul's third piece of advice? There are only 3 of that. And this is verse 8 and 9. Verse 8 is the one. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about these things. I know that my mind can very quickly focus on the problem, whether it's a problem person or a problem situation, because I want to solve it, I want to fix it. And some of those are not fixable, at least not by me. My job is not to fix everything, because it's too hard. My job is to put my thinking, especially in a difficult time, on the things that I know are good, true, noble, right. Not all the rubbish that some people say, but what's right, what's pure, what's lovely, what's admirable. In other words, what is of God. And that will calm me and lift my spirit and remind me once again, God is God. And I can trust him. I'm going to put my trust there, and in all the things that he says are right, not in the rubbish that's going on in any other situation at the moment. Plus one. I said that Paul was in need and he was in prison, and that brings lots of needs. And here he's saying thank you to these people who've kindly given things to him eventually. And yet he is not so totally dependent on it that he can't be content until they give. Do you know the difference? He says in verse 14, it was good of you to share in my troubles. Moreover, as you Philippians know, in the early days of your acquaintance in the gospel, when I set out from Macedonia, not one church shared with me in the matter of giving and receiving except you. I mean, that's great. Giving, whether it's to me or to other people, is fantastic. Keep doing it. And then he said, even when I was in Thessalonica, you sent me aid again and again when I was in need. He said, not that I'm looking for a gift. He said, my contentment is not dependent on a gift. It certainly helps. But my contentment is not dependent on that. He's had to learn that. And then he says, I've received full payment and even more. I'm amply supplied now that I've received from Epaphroditus the gifts you sent. They're a fragrant offering, acceptable, a sacrifice, pleasing to God. My God will meet all your needs according to his glorious riches in Christ Jesus. So what he's saying is I'm not dependent on gifts. Of course he wants gifts. Of course they're good. Of course they'll help you. And thank you very much because you've got very generous hearts. And that's a gift in itself. But he, for years and years, I don't know how long it was, I'll say months and months at least, had to do something when he wasn't getting the gifts. And that's where he had to learn to be content. So I've learned to be content, and now I can receive your gifts with thanks. But I'm not just going to be content only when the gifts come. That's hard. Does it make sense? And I think we often still, Christmas is coming, there's the big gift, Jesus, but of course there's all of the other things that will happen, other little gifts that will happen, or might happen. I don't know what happens in your families. But being content is bigger than whether you get gifts or not. You know, we had to learn that as kids. Somebody might get a big present that I got, you know. You measure things in terms of tangible gifts. Well, I did. And then I became a Christian, and that changed a lot of things. And I think the same is true for Paul. Once he became a Christian, he was on this new learning path, learning to be content, and ends up in gratitude and contentment out of all of his various difficulties. Hope that helps.